The Legend of Zelda. It's a series so huge and legendary that you can't say it without being all woo about it. It's a multi-game franchise that has existed for over 35 years now and sold over 125 million copies worldwide. I want to explore the franchise's past and where it is now, while also discussing its effect on the gaming industry as a whole. I've talked to another developer in the game industry, Peter Tamty, a developer on games such as the Halo franchise and the upcoming 6 Days in Fallujah, to discuss game development and really get the ins and outs of how AAA games are truly crafted. The story of Zelda revolves around one man, Shigeru Miyamoto. While working at Nintendo, Shigeru has had a hand in creating several historic video game characters such as the likes of Mario and Donkey Kong, and of course, Link from the Legend of Zelda series. Roughly 60 or so years ago, we would find a young Shigeru in his hometown of Sonobe, Kyoto, in Japan. At a young age, Shigeru had a sense of adventure. He was often found exploring the small caves and forests that surrounded his family home in Sonobe. With this sense of adventure and a sprinkle of creativity, Shigeru found himself working at a company known as Nintendo. At the time of Shigeru's entrance, Nintendo was known for its creation of Hanafuda playing cards. They would eventually transition into the production of electronic devices such as arcade cabinets and or handheld arcade toys. They would later enter the at-home video game industry with the creation of the Nintendo Entertainment System, or the NES. Sorry about that. Shigeru was tasked by Nintendo to create two major launch titles for the system. One of them ended up being the Super Mario Bros. And the topic of today, The Legend of Zelda. Before we talk about Zelda, I wanted to have a quick diversion into my interview with Peter Tamty, where we quickly discuss why he makes video games and why he's chosen to create 6 Days in Fallujah.
There is something about the character of these people that I don't think is fully appreciated or understood, especially across the world. And I've wanted to share these experiences, these stories that these guys told me, along with who these individuals are as people for a long time, and still to this day, no major film, no major TV show has covered what became the largest battle our nation has fought since the Vietnam War. And the reason for that should be obvious to people right now, because if you do try to tackle the battle for Fallujah, there are people who are going to attack. They're going to attack very strongly, because there are people that have made opposition to the Iraq War a religion. And they don't have an interest in hearing stories of soldiers and Marines who have been, who participated in that. And they don't want those stories to be told. But I think it's important that we tell those stories. I think it's a number of reasons why that's important that we do that through a video game. The first one is because I believe that solving real-life challenges for yourself gives you empathy for the person who had to solve them in real life. All other media is about watching how someone else did something. But video games are about what you do.
In 1992, Shigeru Miyamoto sat down for an interview with Famicom Tsushin magazine. He was discussing his work on the Zelda series up to that point. In the same interview, Shigeru goes on to discuss what he believes video games are, what they can be, and he shares a very similar view to what Peter Tamty said in my interview. The quote reads as follows: "In my opinion, a game isn't just the time spent playing it. It also includes moments when you're away from your home and think, I'm going to play when I get back. That means we should be making games that cause players to think to themselves, maybe I'll play today for 5 minutes. If you include even the things you're not sure whether to call games under the umbrella of computer games, the ideas never end. Computer games are testing all sorts of new things. We'll never run out of material." It's that very same idea that Peter was discussing. Video games are more than a medium for just entertainment, but can be used as a source of teaching us empathy or ways to really think creatively and outside the box. Nintendo has also held interviews with its developers. 5 years ago, for Zelda's 30th anniversary, they held one with Shigeru discussing some of his inspirations for what Zelda was. His quote reads as follows: "I wanted to bring the sense of adventure to a video game, and people playing computer RPGs back then were bragging about how strong their swordsmen had become and were calling each other at night to exchange information. When I noticed that, I thought it was interesting." With this philosophy in mind, Shigeru wanted to make Zelda something more than just entertainment or a video game. He wanted to build a sense of community around it. It made people ask the question, how did you beat this boss, or where did you find this item? At its core, Zelda demanded its players to be more than just players. It asked them to be adventurers. And when RPGs looked like this, or this, back then, this is almost an entirely new concept.
It is an opportunity to explore something about our world or something completely fictional that allows you just to kind of escape from your normal life and enter into a different world. We talk about immersion in the video game business, and we try to do that. We try to bring people out of their normal life and let them experience somebody else's life, or just simply a really intellectually stimulating challenge.
Getting to explore a new world and solving intellectual puzzles is exactly what Zelda sought out to be. With the background being discussed, we can now move on to what Zelda was as a game. The Legend of Zelda is something very special. It was co-developed around the same time as Super Mario Bros., a very linear side-scrolling game. Zelda was developed to be the almost exact opposite, an unlinear, top-down adventure game, rather. Due to Zelda's unlinear-esque gameplay, the story played a big portion of it. A lot of it was imaginative. The manual gave you a skeletal view of what the actual story was. A hero, Link, tasked to find the pieces of the Triforce of Wisdom to save Princess Zelda from the evil clutches of a alien pig monster known as Ganon. What actually happened in between was kind of what you did. You told the story of Link through your gameplay. Through your efforts and trials and tribulations, you had to form the story of the hero and save the princess. Not to mention, this was also one of the first times that you could actually save a video game. At this point, video games were kind of one time through. If you died, you had to start the whole thing over and from the beginning. Or there was a very crude password system where you had to remember 13, 14, or 15 long character passwords to essentially save with quotes. The cartridge that Nintendo had produced for Zelda had a built-in battery that allowed for the game to actually be saved, thus you could continue from where you left off. This was absolutely revolutionary at this point in time. No longer did you need to remember extremely ridiculously long passwords to continue from where you left off, or no longer did you need to die and just struggle through the game again. You could save, play again the next day, or however long you wanted to play whenever. This was incredible. None of this is actually talking about the gameplay either. The actual playing the game was addictive. Your movement is crisp and fast. You have multiple items that you can utilize to solve different problems and fight monsters. It was truly an experience that at the time was something extremely new and exciting. Looking at the game now, it may seem a little crude and kind of goofy and maybe even unfun and almost confusing which is what many people would have felt back then. It was brutally unhelpful, which was kind of the point. Shigeru, like I said earlier, wanted people to play with each other. They wanted them to discuss with friends and whoever they could talk to solve problems as a community. And it all ultimately culminates together for when you finally beat a dungeon, or you finally collect all the pieces of the Triforce and beat Ganon and save the princess. It ultimately feels rewarding because you did the work, you put in the effort, and you talk to people to solve those problems. And that's the ultimate goal of what Zelda is it's supposed to give you that sense of achievement, accomplishment, and just pure joy of having gone through that adventure, and it makes you want to do it again and again. It's addictive. And that's ultimately the reason why this franchise has sold so many copies, existed for 35 years, and become one of Nintendo's staple franchises. The Zelda franchise is home to some of the most widely recognized video games of all time, and the fact that Nintendo was able to develop Zelda and keep it alive for so long is the fact that each game built upon what the first Zelda set out for it. Each game was the next evolution in the franchise and the series. Of course, you're going to have the hits and you're going to have the misses, as every series or game or form of art will happen. It still stayed very consistent to what the soul of the game is. The soul of achieving tasks through your own mental capacity or through the friends and the community that you make. It's relatively stayed the same since the beginning. This year marks the 35th anniversary of the series, and there is an expectation that a new game will release this year. It's a sequel to what is now considered to be one of the greatest games of all time, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild for the Nintendo Switch, a game that reinvented and refocused what Zelda really was in modern times. Many original Zelda fans would argue that Breath of the Wild is almost an identity shift in what the series is, but ultimately when you look at it at its center, at its core, Breath of the Wild is more like the first game than any other Zelda game has been since the original. It's an open world, unlinear, do what you like kind of game. You solve the problems, you are told from the beginning, go stop Ganon, but it doesn't tell you how to do it. It's up to the player, it's up to you to figure out, how do I get from here to there without losing a million times. It doesn't hold your hand, but it also keeps that sense of adventure where it almost pushes you to continue to go for that. It will always leave trinkets, it will always have something new and more for you to see, and it makes you want to continue to play. Zelda has almost entered this mythical stage in its lifespan as a video game. It's legendary, excuse the pun. The stories that it's told and the characters that it's created have inspired millions of people around the world, including myself, to view the world as its own form of adventure. The game teaches its players to be the hero and be the courageous person that we can all be on the inside. Zelda has made a massive impact on my life, and it's been there through the good and the bad, and it's really guided me through a lot of life situations that I never thought I'd have to go through, but it's consistently been there and helped me through them. And I believe that's what Shigeru Miyamoto had ultimately wished to do with the creation of the first Zelda, and it's even right when you start the game. In the first Zelda, the first thing you do is you walk into a small cave right off the side of the screen, and you run into a man. He says one thing: "It's dangerous to go alone. Take this." Now, he may be just giving you a sword to guide you through the rest of the game, but it's ultimately what I interpreted as Shigeru reaching out to the player himself, telling us not to take on this adventure alone, but to work together and make connections, not just in the video game, but in the world and in our own lives. Oh shoot, I forgot about the music. The music itself is on the same degree as the game. It's just as legendary and almost deserves its almost own 30-minute documentary. In an interview, we learned that Koji Kondo was tasked to essentially write the music in what felt like a couple of days. It was the main theme of the game, and the piece that they had chosen was still under copyright laws that they were unaware of, so he had to crunch in order to get this main theme for the actual development of the game. And oh my god, what an incredible piece of music that's gone down in history as one of the greatest video game themes out there. And I know I'm not supposed to do this, but the music is just too important, and it's right here.